The Disney Princess line has proven to be one of the biggest merchandise powerhouses since its inception in the year 2000. This came from the Disney Consumer Products division, where many of the heroines who were at the heart of the company in some of their most influential ages show up on everything from dolls to backpacks to band-aids and everything in between. For nearly a decade, this franchise only featured those princesses that came before, but after some higher-level creative shakeups just at the tail end of the 2000s, we were on the precipice of something new for the brand: new princesses. We started with Tiana, still traditionally animated, but the next year saw Rapunzel, the first Disney princess to come from a 3D computer-generated film. The next we'd see came another 2 years later in 2012 from the newest Pixar fare. You've all seen the title and thumbnail, with Merida. With her 13th film and nearly 2 decades after entering the feature film business, Brave marked Pixar's first film with a female protagonist. I remember a few years prior to it being announced that was something John Lasseter confirmed on a Q&A. With Lasseter now taking up a higher role for all of Disney animation starting in the late 2000s, it's no surprise that this further push for princesses made its way over to Pixar, as this classic heroine role for the company would provide a unique status and setting for a new protagonist and original film in Pixar's arsenal. Initially entitled The Bear and the Bow and renamed it Brave, a change very in line with the other animated films at the time, which makes sense considering how Tangled performed in comparison to The Princess and the Frog. The film went on to gain generally favorable reviews, nearly $540 million at the worldwide box office, and the coveted Best Animated Feature at the Academy Awards. Despite finding a decent success upon release, the film has fallen into the territory where people don't always recognize it as one being made by Pixar, or it's just one that doesn't come to mind when you think of the studio. A line of thought you'd often hear is that Pixar made the Disney movie in 2012, while Disney made the Pixar one with Wreck-It Ralph. And while it's not something I agree with, as I see the character journeys and world building in Brave to be much more in line with that of a Pixar film, I do recognize that the tone of the film is quite unlike most of the studio's output at that time. It doesn't help that at the time so many animated films were CGI and nearly everyone would be labeled as Pixar as essentially a generic term. Merida herself stood out among the princesses in the Disney canon. She didn't sing, didn't have a romantic interest, and didn't display the same regality as the others at the time, so she really set the groundwork for later princesses like Moana and Raya, and the Frozen sisters as well, even though they aren't technically part of the princess line. Upon being inducted into the line of Disney princesses, Merida received a 2D redesign in line with the older characters, and thus she would show up in the same media and merchandise lines as them from that point going forward. With an appearance in Sofia the First, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and even showing up in live action with ABC's Once Upon a Time, it became apparent that this character's trajectory was far different than that of others from Pixar. These guest appearances and other properties are fine. They kind of water down a lot of Merida's character traits, but for the most part, these are small roles, so it doesn't matter too much. You're probably never going to see me dog on a Disney Junior show, but honestly, her design looks way better in Sofia the First than in Ralph Breaks the Internet. Honestly, most of the princesses look a little goofy to me in that one, which isn't great for the ones using a similar art style. They make the joke about nobody understanding her. It's a play on the other studio and her Scottish accent. It's an alright joke, but I guess she doesn't really do anything besides that. Once Upon a Time having her doesn't really make too much sense considering she's from an original movie, not a classic fairy tale, but being part of this much bigger line requires more synergy. I suppose the inclusion of Brave in Once Upon a Time is a lot better than a fully fledged live-action film, since it's at least part of a larger story, but all the newer fairy tale and Disney characters that show up on that show kinda just feel like ratings ploys. Involvement in the princess line has also given Merida a lot more representation at the Disney parks, and that's always great to see because they've used Pixar a lot more sparingly as of late, I feel, especially at Walt Disney World in Florida. She appears in parades and character dining, and had a fully fledged meet and greet in Magic Kingdom up until Encanto replaced it just recently, and it feels the performers are really able to have a lot of fun with her and be more rambunctious than usual. When making my video on Pixar's brands being recycled, the use of Merida wasn't mentioned. As for one, I think it deserved its own video as there's so much. It also gives me the opportunity to talk about an underrepresented film in Pixar's canon. But rather than the whole world of Brave getting a spotlight, it just tends to be Merida. Technically, as Frozen isn't part of the franchise, Brave is the only Disney princess film to win the Best Animated Feature Oscar. And as I said, she seems to be well liked enough, but especially as of late with more and more additions to the lineup, Merida shifted to the sidelines. Pixar hasn't done anything with the brand at all since her coronation in 2013, as characters typically find themselves in this line as soon as they can't sell merchandise on film franchise name alone. This is a major reason why Frozen was never inducted, and why Moana 2 releasing now is a shock to many, among other developments I talked about in my last video. Brave typically won't show up in the same sections as other Pixar movies in Disney stores or the sections that sell pins in Disney parks, I've noticed. There's typically no crossover on the merchandise, which showcase multiple franchises, and Merida didn't even show up for the opening of the Pixar Place Hotel when they were able to get Lightning McQueen and Mater out there. As of now, it feels that Merida, who was once a welcomed protagonist amongst the Pixar pantheon, has lost her once home. And except for the occasional social media post, she'll only show up when the other princesses are present. Thank you all for watching all the way to the end, and as always, let me know what you think of this topic. What do you think of Brave, and why do you think this singular transfer of ownership essentially occurred here? I didn't talk about the director switch or anything in-depth production or story-wise, so those may be topics for another day. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.